Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us at our, Sven, what is this? Our 15th? No, 13th ASRG webinar?
20s.
20. Wow. So we're getting pretty good at this, guys. And again, thank you for joining. Go ahead and we don't have a poll today organized. So if you could just go ahead and leave in the comments or in the chat section of this webinar, tell us where you're joining from. We'd be interested to know. One of the coolest things about running these webinar is just seeing where everybody's coming from. So go ahead and leave in the chat where you're joining us from, and we'll go ahead and get started in a few minutes here. So awesome to see, we already have with just the few responses, people joining us from all over. So I see India and Egypt and Canada and England. So really, really cool. Oh, Germany as well. And then I'm here in Detroit. Okay, guys, thank you everyone for joining once again. I'm going to go ahead and get started here. So just to put some names to the faces, who you'll be hearing from today is not the usual. It's not John today. He's not available. So me talking here, I'm Brandon Berry. I am the ASRG North America coordinator. So I help organize some of the chapters all across North America. My day-to-day role is CEO at a company called Block Harbor, which focuses on cybersecurity services for the automotive industry. Sven, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. So hello all. My name is Sven. I'm the lead for the ASRG location in Stuttgart. So in this location we have just more than 1,000 members. So it's a very huge chapter of ASRG, and it was also the first one that we founded. And in my professional life, I work in the area of product security, in a dedicated development part of the Robot Bosch GmbH, which is a big supplier worldwide active.
Cool. So before we dive into the presentation, just a little bit about the ASRG. Here's a picture of what it looked like before coronavirus, when all around the world we were hosting these local meetups. And so that would be something like these presentations, but brought to you locally, where we could have a discussion about topics in automotive security. We're focused on 3 core pillars with the ASRG: knowledge, networking, collaboration. And yeah, so, I'm really looking forward to, both interacting with you guys, as attendees of this webinar, but also in the future as we start to get our meetups back off the ground, so that we can talk in person and have discussions about some of these really important topics that need to be had by the community like us, in order to drive solutions in automotive security. So a little bit about our size. I mean, really tremendous growth even through this pandemic. We're now up to 29 locations. I think in the past few weeks we've seen a couple of chapters come up in India and Canada, really all over the world. We've had tremendous success in finding people to start up these chapters, to get something going in their local community. If you're listening to this and there's maybe not a chapter local to you, and you want to get that going so that as in-person meetups start to become acceptable again, just reach out at hello@asrg.io. We would love to help you start that up, help you get it going from a playbook of making some of these other chapters successful. Okay, another stat to point out here is that we're almost over 5,000 members, and that's a really cool thing. That's people from automotive security professionals doing this for their day-to-day. That's hackers, and I'm sure both black hat and white hat hackers. That's students, lots of students joining this because they're interested in things like doing research at their university. Really, really cool member base here, and it's growing quite quickly. One of the cool things about that as well is that you can contact these 4,800 members by joining our Slack channel or Signal. So again, just reach out at hello@asrg.io, because I don't have the QR codes here, but we'd love to have a conversation with you if you do just want to get in contact with some of our communication channels. So Sven, why don't you tell us a little bit about the Secure Coding Tournament?
Yes, so in April we do, together with our partner Secure Code Warrior, a tournament, and this was very successful. We received a lot of positive feedback, and as well as the questions to repeat it. And now we plan to do it again. So end of this month, from 28th to 30th of August, we will have our second Secure Coding Tournament. And this time we call it ASRG Grand Prix Virtual Secure Coding Tournament. And with the link below the presentation, you just can register yourself if you like to participate. So I put also the link below in the description part in the video, so of the video, so that you can click directly. And if you register now, you are able just to make you familiar with the platform. So it's an online platform behind, so that you know how it works, what you can do there. And there are the complete trainings available for you. So you can also train there, solve challenges there, and learn and see a little bit how the tasks are, so that you are well prepared for the tournament. And after your registration, don't forget to register yourself also for the tournament. You have to do it especially for the tournament to be participating. And the tournament is like this. You don't need to be online the whole 3 days. You can log in and log out whenever you want, and you can solve the challenges there. So if more challenges are solved by you and you don't need so much help, you will get more points. And at the end of the 3 days, we have a classification, and the first 3 places will get also some small prizes and so on. And this is a little bit gamified, so we want to have a lot of fun together there, but also with the training sessions and also the hints that we get, it's a kind of learning how we can prevent built-in backdoors or vulnerable code if we program something in the world, some IoT devices, or as well as ECUs or web services as well for the automotive industry. So be welcome, and I hope we will have a lot of fun again.
Yeah, and having taken a look at it, and some of my team partook the last Secure Code Warrior tournament. I mean, they had so much fun. They learned so much by just trying to identify vulnerabilities and bugs in code. A lot about defensive programming, writing software in a secure way. So really, come anyone. I think it's a learning experience, whether you're, an expert programmer and you think you develop everything you do securely, or, maybe you're not a programmer at all. Just come and take a look at the code and try and figure out what it looks like to when there are weaknesses in software. I cannot underemphasize how or overemphasize how important defensive programming is in automotive, because passenger safety could be affected by it. So really cool, Sven. I look forward to it, and I'll be joining August 28th. Okay, with that said, I think we're ready to hand it off. Today, Vic Harkness is going to be presenting on with the presentation topic of Houston, we CAV a problem, which I love that title. So I'll be handing this over to Vic, and Vic, you should be ready to go ahead and get going on your presentation. So Vic, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Vic. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep, I can hear you.
Yeah, cool. So I'm here today to talk about Europe's proposals for future intelligent roadways to support connected and autonomous vehicles, or CAVs. It's a bit of a mouthful, so just call them CAVs. So here's a brief overview of the talk. I'm going to talk about who I am, where the projects come from. A large amount of the talk is just going to be me talking about the various proposals that have been made, and frankly shit-talking them a bit, because I don't think particularly much of some of them. From here, I'm going to be discussing some of the threats that are likely to be faced by these future ecosystems, who's likely to target them, with what sort of resource levels, and why they're going to target them. I'll talk through a couple of example scenarios of how an attacker might infiltrate the network and to what end. And I will also provide some brief considerations on how to improve the situation. And finally, we'll have conclusions, but spoiler alert, everything is nightmare. There'll also be a few acknowledgements, and then time for me to take questions. So first up, who am I? I am Vic. I've done a BSc in robotics and AI and moved on to doing a master's in cybersecurity. I'm also a qualified falconer. Does not in the least qualify me to talk about cars, but here we go. So I ended up doing cybersecurity at MWR InfoSecurity, which then became part of F-Secure Consulting. Through F-Secure Consulting, we got this package of work, which I will talk about on the next slide. But I was the lead author on the white paper that stands behind this talk. I don't know if one of my colleagues is in the chat right now to provide a link to the white paper. If they're not, I can provide one after I've done the talk. So yeah, this project is part of the Zenzik Cyber Feasibility Report project. So this project aims to inform and advise the UK government on the security of future CAVs and ITS networks, with CAV meaning connected and autonomous vehicles and ITS meaning intelligent transport systems. They basically refer to the same thing, but some orgs prefer to call it CAV, some prefer to call it ITS. I think generally more people say ITS, but Zenzik tends to say CAV, so I've been referring to them as CAV. But yeah, you can just kind of switch them out a little bit. So as I'm sure you're aware, automated vehicles are becoming a thing. In the future, it's envisioned that most people will drive either hyper-connected vehicles or have automated vehicles. To support this future, the creation of sensor-rich intelligent roadways has been proposed. The UK government doesn't necessarily want our country to be the first to create these intelligent roadways, but they want to be the best. They want the most robust roadways, they want them to be the most secure. So the Zenzik Cyber Feasibility Report feeds into this goal. 7 companies worked on this problem space, and Zenzik created a summary report that then went off to government. My team looked at the V2X area of the problem, or vehicle to everything, as well as making considerations on how to test these future networks at scale. But to understand the problem space, we needed to look at the space as a whole, really. So our paper provides an overview of the entire problem space, as well as making recommendations on testing at scale. And again, hopefully I'll have a link to the white paper available at some point. So a quick note though, this is all based on proposals for future CAV infrastructure, which have been provided by the European Telecommunications Standards Institute, the International Organization for Standardization, and the European Commission. So it's a really Europe-centric presentation, I'm afraid. Since doing this talk a couple of weeks back at the Car Hacking Village at DEF CON, I've been informed that although there are a lot of parallels between the EU and the US's proposals, the US's ones are a bit more robust. So a lot of the issues that I do highlight in these proposals are apparently not an issue in the US ones anymore because they've already been identified and fixed in their proposals. So relevant to the EU, but not so much to the US audience, I'm afraid. But hopefully, this talk and the white paper will provide someone who wants to enter the problem space and get up to speed with future CAV proposals with enough information to kind of hit the ground running. So let's talk about some of the components of the CAV ecosystem. First up, we'll look at the in-vehicle systems. So whilst our area of the project was dealing with the vehicle-to-everything communications, I'd still consider the internal systems of a vehicle as an important part of the CAV ecosystem. Vehicles are no longer expected to be used solely as a means of transportation. They guide us to our destination using maps. They advise us on the best route to take using traffic information. They entertain us using audio and video. In the future, they will ease the burden of driving altogether by being able to autonomously navigate to our destinations. To facilitate this, vehicles contain complex internal networks. Future vehicles, and even, I suppose, today's vehicles at this rate, are more akin to computer networks. Like lots of smaller computers all working on smaller parts of the task network together. For instance, there could be one computer that handles the infotainment system, one that handles the car's lights, etc. Future vehicles will be handling large amounts of data taken from a range of sources. You've got external sources like GPS data, traffic data, data coming from vendors, and you've got your internal data sources. So you've got your classic integrated sensor data like speed and tire pressure, but there's also, the more futuristic systems will have cameras, range sensors, etc. You've also got input coming from the user, which is going to be just standard controls like steering, pressing brakes. Some of the proposals we looked at also expect some more novel sensors to be used. Like it's been proposed that the future system will be able to record driver biometrics. So if the driver was to have a heart attack, the car would be able to detect that and take, action that would be appropriate in that scenario. Since you've got data coming from such a wide range of sources, how can you trust it? So it's a given that the attackers are likely to target internal vehicle networks. I'm not going to talk specifically about data hygiene within internal vehicle networks. I mean, I'm sure people here have done, I'm sure there's already been better talks done here already on that subject, and that you all know a lot more about it than I do. But in general, just handle the data with care. No component should place absolute trust in the data it receives. I mean, really, it's up to you guys to decide how trustworthy components are and design your models based around that trust. But the sort of things that attackers are likely to target are the vehicle sensors. They make a potential entry point for introducing false or malicious data into the vehicle networks. And people are already playing around with abusing camera systems to cause automated vehicles to misinterpret road signs, or even think that people are in the road when they aren't. Entertainment and infotainment systems are another route for introducing malicious data into or gaining access into connected vehicles. We're already getting familiar with the touchscreen interfaces, which can link to phones, display maps, routing information, etc. In some CAV proposal documents, it's suggested that future infotainment systems will also provide tourist information, like you drive past a mountain and the car is going to start telling you all about it, for better or worse. The potentials are similar to sensors. You can try and manipulate behavior by inserting malicious data, such as incorrect traffic data, or use it as a point from which to pivot elsewhere. And next up in these internal vehicle networks, we've got applications, because you've got to have those apps to be futuristic. In the envisioned future connected and autonomous vehicles, you'll be able to download apps from an app store, like how you do on your phone. And we all know how good app security is, how good device security is. There's little information so far on how this will look in terms of security and access permission models. They've largely just said there's going to be an app store. We don't know if it's going to be like the Apple Store, where you need vetting to make apps, or what. It seems like an excellent route into a vehicle's internal network, though. I mean, maybe the apps will just be used in jailbreaking. Like, it turns out when Tesla upgrades are bought, they can be remotely updated. When there was the massive fires in California a few years ago, or I guess potentially even now, Tesla remotely pushed free battery upgrades to cars within the area of effect so that they could escape easier. But the Lord Elon giveth and the Lord Elon taketh away. There's been lots of cases of people buying second-hand Tesla models with certain upgrades purchased and enabled, only to then have them be remotely disabled again after purchase. Perhaps applications will be used for this sort of functionality. But it certainly seems like a fun area for future investigation, right? So what if someone manages to compromise multiple aspects of a vehicle's internal network at once? The vehicle needs to be able to somehow detect and handle this, other than just crashing into a wall because it thinks it's a road, Wile E. Coyote style. Perhaps it would be more appropriate for a vehicle that detects anything funky going on to drive to the side of the road and refuse to move again until it gets assistance. Or is that just going to give people a perfect vector for annoying denial of service attacks? I'm going to be really annoying and not answer that. Instead, I'm just going to move on to talking about personal stations. So Etsy has proposed the idea of personal ITS stations. They're just little handheld devices which are designed to be connected to the overarching CAV networks. The exact purpose of them is unclear, but they basically seem to be mobile phones. You can put apps on them, you can look at bus times, you can get maps information. They're basically just mobile phones. But maybe it'll morph into an app which can be used on your own phone rather than something additional you need to carry around, who knows. As far as security goes, I'd say just treat them like a mobile phone. They're likely to be an easy target for theft, so you want them to be lockable and trackable like a phone. And again, don't be completely trusting of the data coming from them, because you're just going to have random people playing with them, they're going to get stolen, lost, all sorts. They're not very trustworthy data sources in my mind. Next up, sensors. The envisioned future intelligent roadways will need lots and lots of supporting infrastructure. Infrastructure to support the connections between connected vehicles, infrastructure to support the automated decision-making capabilities of automated vehicles. Not all vehicles are going to be connected or automated, though. You're still going to get the people like me who are scared of this new technology and want something more old-fashioned. Unfortunately, you can't quite ignore us weirdos who refuse to join the Borg. You still need to know where these old-fashioned vehicles are so that they can be incorporated into your traffic models or avoided by your automated systems. The solution to this is prolific sensing and detecting capabilities. Extensions of current CCTV and radar system capabilities, when augmented by additional sensors, could be sufficient to track old-fashioned vehicles as though they were connected vehicles. In addition to tracking vehicles, sensors can be used to provide supplementary data into decision-making systems. For example, you could have local weather information on road conditions. It's all stuff that's useful to an automated system. A human operator might see that the road is wet and so slow down. It'd be nice if the automatic system could take those sort of actions as well. Thanks to these prolific sensors, it may just well be the case. Unfortunately, covering everything with sensors just means you've got more things to secure, though. So if you're a bit bored, just go search for CCTV on Shodan. You can view CCTV feeds, which isn't that bad, really. Like, it's just going to be roads, it's not that exciting. But some of these cameras are designed to be remotely administered. You just get that traditional admin-admin credentials combo going, and suddenly you've got access to a node within the CAV network. If the network trusts data coming from that CCTV system to a high degree, the CAV network's just going to have a bad time if someone malicious can get into it. So please, make sure you secure your sensors, don't have easily guessable default creds, require admins to use VPNs to remotely administer the cameras. You know, just standard stuff, really. Just please do something if you're working within this space. Next up, we've got the Roadside Units, or RSUs. These RSUs are designed to collect, collate, and forward data from other bits of the network. They'll be taking data from pretty much everything in the network. They can collect data from roadside sensors and vehicles, and they can send this onwards to data hubs designed to inform traffic control decisions. RSUs can also take data from vendors and transmit it back down to vehicles. They're physical units proposed to be positioned every 500 meters along the side of intelligent roadways. I'm told that in the US proposals, they're going to be way less frequent because it seems a bit overkill to have them so frequently, honestly. The RSUs will be connected up in some manner. Some believe that the RSUs should be able to take more active roles within the network, such as directly controlling autonomous vehicles. I think that's a bad idea for reasons that should become clear as this talk goes on. RSUs contain some heavy-duty networking equipment, including industrial network switches and ITS station border routers. You want the industrial network switches to survive the harsh environments of constant outdoor usage. They also support standard security features like MAC address filtering, remote management, network access controls, etc. So while we were doing this study, we read a report from someone who was looking at a demonstration of an RSU. And yes, the switch that was inside the RSU had MAC address filtering in place, but the MAC address of the RSU computer was written on the outside of the box, so not really the most effective security measure. The ITS station border routers within RSUs are designed as the point through which data from the intelligent roadways is sent off to the data hubs. There's a few proposals of what form this transport medium could take. Some suggest using LTE, others suggest leasing access to local council lines. Different approaches come with different security concerns. When securing the RSUs, though, you should take general network infrastructure security approach. You know, consider the physical security. Make the locks on the physical box secure with a tamper detection system. If the RSU is hidden away from view behind some trees, monitor them with CCTV systems. The report that noted that the MAC address of the system was written on the side of the box also noted that, or the researcher, sorry, was also able to set up a tent next to an RSU because it was positioned quite far back from the road in some trees. And he was able to spend a couple of days messing around with it and no one noticed. It's very important that you're actually keeping an eye on these things. Likewise, you should make sure that tamper detections are actually followed up on. So cross-reference timings of tamper detections with maintenance schedules. If the tampering was not a false alarm, take action. Consider all data from that node unsafe. Don't make any important decisions based upon it. Follow good network security best practices. Change default creds, disable unused services. Make sure that a procedure for patching devices is in place. Encrypt the data being held locally. When it is being transmitted onwards, especially if it's going to be making use of third-party transmission mediums. And tangentially, you should also consider the security of device maintenance systems. Engineers carrying out legitimate work upon RSUs will probably have laptops that they plug into the systems. You know, these laptops will probably be provided by the vendor. They'll be very secure. They might also have been plugged into the hotel Wi-Fi the night before and used to browse dodgy porn sites. So they could be bringing all sorts of nasties with them. You can't just trust a laptop just because it's come from a secure source and say, yep, we don't need to worry about the security of that. I know I sound like a broken record, but just don't place absolute trust in any single aspect of the system. So data hubs are where all the data lives. Data will be collated by the RSUs and it'll end up here. The scales of data hubs is a bit unclear right now. Maybe they'll be regional, maybe not, who knows. It's not really clear who run them either, or the exact usage of them. There's a proposal for their usage in test beds, though, and I'll be talking a bit more about test bed proposals later within this talk. But basically, it's going to be necessary for these data hubs to hold large amounts of data so that various bits of meta-analysis can be carried out on them. If you manage to steal data from this, you've got the potential for like spying on people. Say, in the test bed proposals, it's proposed that these will be areas of roadway that vendors will be able to test new vehicle models on. If you've got data from that at a test hub, it's perfect for corporate espionage, really. Or, I mean, if you could just get into the data hub and delete all the data from, like, you know, a competitor, then you could potentially delay their trials schedules, you know, make them rerun trials before they can release anything. The security of the data hubs is going to be incredibly important, and it's likely to need to be quite bespoke. One could probably learn from security best practices for any large-scale sensitive data holder, really. And once again, just make sure that the data hubs don't trust all the data they receive. Don't let little Bobby tables ruin your day. Likewise, you need some form of accountability within the system. If data which is ultimately found to be malicious is frequently being introduced into the data hub, you need to be able to identify where it's coming from so that this can be addressed. So there's the potential for lots of different data transmission media to be used within these future networks. I'll be talking more about the connection issues within the next section when I discuss the bespoke protocols which have been proposed. But LTE is the most obvious connectivity choice. It's simple, fairly accessible nowadays, and reasonably cheap. Some vehicles already make use of LTE, with systems such as eCall, which automatically calls the emergency services for you if a crash is detected. Some LTE can also be used to transmit over-the-air software updates to vehicles. In future CAV systems, LTE will probably be used by the applications. Maybe also by some of the roadside sensors. It's not really clear at this point. But standard LTE security best practices should be followed. Just make sure it's not too obvious if your tech is using 5G LTE so it doesn't get blamed for international pandemics. As mentioned earlier, it's been proposed that lease lines could be used to transmit data from RSUs back to data hubs. If you're sending potentially sensitive data over third-party lines, you probably want to try and encrypt and sign it so it can't be read or tampered with whilst in transit. And from what I can tell, lease lines would only be used for data hub communications, though. Next up, we get to WLANs. Small WLANs within vehicles are proposed which allow the user to get onto the internet via their vehicle. However, it's also been proposed that giant WLANs could be used to handle the majority of communications between CAV network nodes. To me, the proposed usage of WLAN networks, that's a redundancy, isn't it? For WLAN for data transmission between CAV nodes is super interesting. This is going to be enabled through the usage of a relatively new 802.11p standard in OCB mode. And as always with this talk, I will be telling you what that actually means later. First up, we're going to talk about CAM and Denim, the two main transmission protocols that have been proposed for these CAV networks. For those of you in the US, they're pretty much equivalent to DSRC basic safety messages, with BSM Part 1 being equivalent to CAM and Part 2 being equivalent to Denim. As the name suggests, CAM are used for cooperative awareness. They're what lets vehicles know where each other are so that they can move cooperatively. They're basically a heartbeat for the vehicle, providing metrics on the vehicle's current state. This includes the time, location, heading direction, speed, whether the lights are on or not, all that good stuff. The vehicles don't send these to anyone or anything in particular. They're transmitted out into the world for anyone or anything to hear. They're signed by the pseudonym certificates used within the CAV ecosystem. Again, I'll talk more about certificates later. The generation of CAM is controlled by the Cooperative Awareness Basic Service within the vehicle. The CA Basic Service also receives and processes CAM from other vehicles. Denim, on the other hand, are used by vehicles to share an awareness of any events which may have occurred. An event could be that an accident's occurred ahead or that the vehicle has detected the presence of ice on the road. Interestingly, the Denim standards contain the medical emergency flags that I touched on earlier. So this would be how the car is able to report to other cars if the driver's had a heart attack or is entered a diabetic coma or something. So once the vehicle detects any sort of event, which could be a medical emergency, could just be a regular car crash, it creates a new event Denim. This contains info on what the event type is, a geographic area of relevance for the event, including details of which roads will lead up to the encountering event. This DENM is transmitted out into the world where it's picked up by the DEN basic service of other vehicle nodes. When a vehicle picks up a DENM, the onus is placed upon the receiving vehicle to decide the relevance of the message. The vehicle will determine if it's within the geographic area of relevance for the event, and if it is, it updates its internal records and automatically retransmits the DENM onwards to other vehicles. If it's not, it just ignores it. Based on this automatic forwarding, vehicles may be updated as to the existence of event as soon as they enter the relevant area. Likewise, if the initially reporting vehicle leaves the area, the event is not forgotten. Vehicles may also provide updates to an existing event, even if they were not the first vehicle to report it. They can also send negation DENM, which reports that an event has ended. As I mentioned before, both CAM and DENM are signed. The proposed certificate system in CAV is a little bit bonkers. I'll describe it in more detail later. But the key point here is that the messages are signed. They're not encrypted because CAVs don't join networks in the traditional sense. Because there's no network joining, it's up to the CA and DEN basic services to verify the validity of all received messages. And I think that this could be problematic for a lot of reasons. It seems like it could be easy to jam a given vehicle just by spamming out messages near it. Likewise, if an attacker could fuzz the basic service and find a message that would crash it, then there's little resiliency against potentially harmful messages. It wouldn't even matter if the messages was from a valid node or not, because the vehicles just are going to process everything they receive. There's no nonce value in CAM or DENM, so you've got your standard risks from replay attacks. And in some of these future networks, some of the information contained within CAM will be used within the intelligent roadway systems for deciding things like traffic flow. To say you're an ambulance, the traffic light behavior might automatically be updated to favor traffic coming from your direction. So why not just record a packet capture of an ambulance and just continually replay that? The closest thing there is to nonce values that's already included is timestamps. And these, in my mind, kind of weird too. Like, epochs weren't good enough for these guys. The time since the start of 2004 is taken in milliseconds, then divided by 2 to the power of 16, or about, well, exactly 65,536, which is coincidentally just a touch over the number of milliseconds in a minute. The remainder is then transmitted. So whilst you could kind of use this in your appliances, in your application as a nonce value, you'd have something which could be replayed roughly every minute or so, depending on your tolerances. But yeah, the slightly weird timeliness metric makes it very hard to discern the liveliness of messages at a glance. So just go ahead with those replay attacks, I guess. Another issue stems from the automatic forwarding of DENM to if the receiving vehicle is within the area of relevance. Like I mentioned, DENM described an event. Vehicles can automatically retransmit received DENM. Something interesting about these CAV networks is that a mechanism for detecting and punishing malicious behavior is proposed to exist. The details aren't really specified, but the general gist of it is that nodes can automatically report that a certain vehicle is sending out malicious data. The vehicle be identified by its signing certificate. It's unclear how many reports are needed to trigger this behavior, or if any additional checking is required, but if a certain threshold of reports is hit, a vehicle's certificate will be temporarily rescinded. This means that other vehicles or other nodes wouldn't see its messages as valid, and so it will just disregard them. Now, when a vehicle automatically forwards on a DENM, it repackages the message. The sender ID is replaced with that of the new sender, and the message is re-signed with the resender's certificate. Can you see where I'm going with this? Say the threshold of reports was 5. If you could have 5 vehicle nodes that you control send out DENM containing malicious data near the target, it in theory would repeat them all. Then that vehicle would hit the ban threshold and be banned. Suddenly it's denied access to the CAV network. Generally, I think that mechanisms such as automatic bans need to be carefully considered because there's a real potential for abuse here. So how do we transmit these CAM and DENM? Adhoc networking is required for CAV networks because of the node's tendency to move around a lot at high speeds, vehicles. Whilst the idea of having passing vehicles connect directly to RSUs as they go past has been floated, this was written off because there wouldn't be sufficient time. I previously made a comment about I'm not sure how fast people think future vehicles go, but apparently when you're combining speeds and considering all the timings of negotiations and stuff, it's just, yeah. Vehicles do go very fast, turns out. And I must apologize now, for it is acronym o'clock. I'll try to make this explanation as clear as possible, but please do ask me questions afterwards if it's not. So to create the ad hoc networks that have been proposed for this, they're suggesting the usage of the 802.11p standard in OCB mode. So what's an 802.11p OCB? 802.11x is an IEEE standard for network access control. It provides the authentication mechanism for devices wishing to join a LAN or WLAN, as well as allowing for things like network decongestion. It's the stuff your home network probably uses. On top of this standard sits 802.11p, which is designed for vehicle networks. It's licensed for use in both the US's WAVE and Europe's ITS-G5 communications networks. It's been allocated the frequency band of 5.9 gigahertz. It's all fairly standard so far. But we need to have ad hoc networks. My home Wi-Fi isn't ad hoc. I need to connect devices to it. How does this work? So what they've proposed is the use of 802.11p in OCB mode, which stands for outside context of a BSS, or basic service set. The basic service set refers to the collection of things which can communicate with each other within an 802.11 network. When you join things to your home Wi-Fi network, they become part of the BSS. Messages sent within the network are tagged with a BSS ID, or basic service set ID identifier, which marks them as belonging to the WLAN. In 802.11p OCB mode, we don't want any of that. We want everything to be able to transmit to everyone else with no need to join the network. So this allows for ad hoc networking in that everything is just spitting out its CAM and Denim to anyone that will listen. No authentication is required to be able to transmit within these networks. It's up to the receivers to investigate the signing certificate and assess if the messages are valid or not. There's nothing marking them as being valid because there's no BSS that all the vehicles are joined to. Because of this, there's no inbuilt decongestion apart from the vehicles doing some basic polling to work out if, how much congestion there is and doing some automatic rate adjustment. But can you see where problems might start to pop up here? If you said denial of service, you'd be correct. So what we got here is a nice little graph with the frequency allocations for ITS-G5. The EU has provided permission for ITS-G5 transmission within the 5.47 to 5.925 gigahertz range. It's a nice band. You see that nice big chunk on the left in the graph? That's for broadband radio access networks, radio local area networks, and wireless local area networks. Key point, you need to make use of dynamic frequency selection to avoid co-channel interference if you want to be able to transmit in this range. Since our CAV networks won't be connecting to a WLAN in traditional sense, they can't do any of that. So there goes a big chunk of the band that we've been allowed access to. You've got your little DSRC band reserved in the middle, can't use that. The band on the far right, 5.905 to 5.925 gigahertz, that's reserved for future use. So basically we're left with only 5.88 to 5.905 gigahertz for CAV networks. And I hear there's a lot of cars, like a lot of them, and there's going to be a shitload of sensors too. It just doesn't seem like it's going to go well to me. So the proposed ad hoc networks and CAV networks are pretty unique because it removes the issues from everything having to be joined to the network. And there's a certificate infrastructure in place, so you can still verify the validity and integrity of received messages. That's the problem. When people aren't having to join a network, it means that anyone can transmit. You've got to process every single message to work out if it's valid or not. I think that in these future CAV networks, denial of service is going to be a real big issue. Both on the frequency jamming front, I mean, someone could just literally buy a frequency jammer and run it. No one stopping, well, I mean, I guess the police are stopping you do that. But they probably take a while to get to you, so technically no one's stopping you doing that. And also from inducing the vehicles to process large quantities of junk messages. Or, I mean, does it even have to be junk, really? With the automatic forwarding of Denim, you wouldn't need many cars in an area to get a packet storm going. If we decide to go with the scenario whereby roadside units can be used to teleoperate autonomous vehicles, this seems like it's going to go kind of badly. Ideally, no vehicle should need to be connected to the CAV networks to operate. Whilst being joined will increase the efficiency of operations, Each vehicle should be capable of operating without receiving any data from external sources, in my mind. Next up, I'm finally going to talk about the proposed usage of public key infrastructure and vehicle certificates. The European Commission proposes an entire public key infrastructure, or PKI, for CAV networks. In their proposals, they keenly stress that it's just a proposal, not gospel. I mean, it's fairly standard stuff in the proposals, really. At the top, you've got your root certificate authority, and the proposals describe in great detail how to physically secure these. Fairly standard inscription schemes using AES 128. I'm not going to go into too much details on the overarching PKI because it's fairly standard stuff. But the vendors will have their own certs, which they'll use to sign vehicle certs before the vehicle is sold. These preloaded certs are known as enrollment credentials. Once a vehicle is sold and out on the road, it uses its enrollment credentials to request access tokens, which are also known as pseudonyms. This goes via roadside units. Now, pseudonyms are where things get a bit weird in my mind. The creator of these future CAV networks have heard that privacy is a good thing, and they want to maintain it within these networks, which, all good so far. They've decided that it would be bad for vehicles to transmit a unique identifier, because then someone could track them. I think they forgot that license plates are a thing, but let's put that aside for now. When a vehicle uses its enrollment credentials to request pseudonyms, it's given a pool of 100 of them. These are valid for a week. These pseudonyms can be used to sign all the CAM and Denim that the vehicle sends out, so they can be verified by other nodes. Pseudonyms are designed to be rapidly changing. The recommendations here are kind of weird. I've chucked them just directly on the slide for you. So, it changes certificate when you start driving, then again at some point in the region of 800 to 1500 meters. Then after you drive a certain distance, it changes it somewhere in the region of 2 to 6 minutes. Then after 15 kilometers, and it's just so arbitrary. I don't really understand how they've decided those. Potentially you could be cycling a lot, and you've got a pool of 100 pseudonyms to use, right? And it's got to last you a week. There's a bit of disparity here on what happens when you run out. According to Etsy, you should request a new pool of 100 once you run out. The European Commission states that you can just reuse them within their validity period of 1 week. But not everyone is always in range of the infrastructure needed to get more pseudonyms. Because of this, vehicles can be preloaded with up to 3 months worth of future dated pseudonyms. So what are the practicalities of this weird pseudonym cycling? When a vehicle cycles to its next pseudonym, it also needs to update its IP address. Otherwise, you could just trivially track it through the changes, So the standards document recommend the usage of stateless address auto-configuration, which is described in RFC 4862. RFC 4862 provides a framework for devices in a network to automatically configure themselves using a mixture of information being advertised by a router and locally available information. This allows the nodes to directly communicate between each other without needing a router, which, is kind of what we want here. CAVs are intended to use IPv6 addresses. It's quite a large address space, so there's a low risk of collision in the pseudonym randomly generated IPv6 addresses, but still, to avoid collisions, RFC 4862 nodes advertise their proposed new IPv6 addresses and give neighbors the chance to respond that they have already claimed them, just because it's best to have the collision avoidance built in from the start, right? But if we're implementing this, then what's to stop an attacker from using this to track a vehicle's IP address changes? I mean, not much really, so long as they keep near it. You just look for the broadcast IP, the proposed IP, and then, just track them through that. Or just look at the MAC addresses, because they're being cycled in a whole separate way to how the IP addresses are. Or more interestingly, what if you always claimed that you were already using the IPv6 address that was being advertised? Could you just tape a little address denial box to a car that automatically lays claim to any address that's being advertised by the vehicle? Again, I think the denial of service is likely to be a real big issue in the future CAV networks, and would like to emphasize again that just no vehicle should need to be connected at all times. Each node should be able to act independently of others, just in case a denial of service happens. In my mind, the pseudonym cycling seems more likely to enable abuse than to protect privacy. As I mentioned before, there are provisions for vehicles to be automatically banned from the CAV networks via their certificates being revoked. The certificates being revoked could potentially just be their pseudonyms. So the attacker could either induce a pseudonym cycle via normal driving, or potentially manipulate their system into cycling on demand. It's an ideal method for ban evasion, really. It's been suggested that hardware trusted components could be used to provide more robust banning mechanisms, and this could be used to wipe the entire pool being stored on the vehicle. But then you've got problems I talked about earlier, whereby you can just cause a vehicle to be unjustly banned from the network. Also, I'm always wary of placing too much trust in anything that's sold as unhackable. It just seems like you're asking for it, you're painting the bullseye on. Not a good idea. Also, there's nothing to say that an attacker would need to control multiple vehicles to be able to gain malicious levels of influence within the CAV networks. So Tesla have already had issues with old parts of head units appearing on eBay and by unscrupulous garages, and they're not even wiping them properly. It's likely that whatever contains the CA or DEN basic service will appear soon enough, on eBay, harvested from written off cars by garages and sold for a quick buck. You just pick up a couple of them. If we're using the scenario whereby vehicles are preloaded with 3 months worth of future dated certificates, it might be that there's still quite a few certificates to be used on this, eBayed head unit. So, or maybe, will the enrollment credentials be revoked when it's being sold on? Possibly not. You could maybe even still use that to request new creds from the network. It might not be the case that the vendor knows the car was written off, so they've not been revoked properly. But then you could use these certificates to your heart's content to avoid bans, You could induce bans in others, you can flood networks with malicious data, whatever you feel like, really. You could even use these to send out your CA/DEN basic service crashing messages that I previously mentioned. Or if you could gain access to multiple pseudonyms at once, use them to simulate other vehicles. You got someone tailgating you? Just start sending out a bunch of spoofed cams signed with one of your other pseudonyms, simulating a vehicle following behind you. Tailgater's car might think there's a car in that space already and fall back. Very convenient. So the final major component of the CAV ecosystem that I want to mention is test beds. So these are going to be regions of roadway which vendors can test their new products on. They can include a mixture of private roads and public roads. They will be absolutely covered in sensors so that vendors can retrieve high-quality trials data. In current proposals, vendors will be able to buy access to data from specific regions of test beds at specific times. It's been suggested that this could be facilitated using a web interface, which comes with its own issues, but generally the data is going to be stored on the data hubs. There's proposed that there'll be dedicated data hubs for these test beds. Although the way that I am wording this, I'm making it sound like the test beds don't exist yet. There are some provisional test beds in place around the world and in the UK because these autonomous vehicles development's already begun. They're already being tested. However, it was the case during this study that we were not able to get access to any of the test beds. If someone happens to be listening now and is an operator at one of the test beds, please do drop me a message. We'd love to come and have a poke, COVID-19 allowing. But with vendors testing new products on these test beds, competition might want to get a sneak peek at that. We've seen pictures of cars on test beds that are just covered in huge stickers, so you can't even work out the profile of the new vehicle. And there's also the very real possibility that vehicles being tested on these test beds might not yet have the most robust security in place. They're not quite considered fully roadworthy yet. So it's really important that these potentially insecure vehicles cannot be used as vectors into the rest of the CAV network. Likewise, it's really important that you can't just have an attacker create a kind of watering hole style attack where they've just put a bit of malware somewhere within the test bed network and it's just passed on to all of the vehicles that are being tested, from where it's then taken back to the vendor's home network when they return the vehicle back for, post-trials analysis. So I'm now going to move on to talk about some of the threats that F-Secure think CAV networks will face and talk you through some examples of how these could be actualized. If this is an area of interest to you, I'd recommend reading our full white paper as it goes into much more detail about the types of assets which would be considered within CAV networks, as well as talking about specific threat actor groups, including APT32. I can't see the chat, so I don't know if it's been posted already, but if it has not, I will post it when I'm done talking. So here's a rough overview of the threat actors that are likely to target the CAV networks. Apologies, I live next to a road and it's quite loud. So at the top of this, we've got the nation-state actors. Highly funded, high amounts of resources, advanced tools. You know, they're probably just so many 0 days. They can just buy whatever they want, really. As we move down this pyramid, we've got kind of less skilled people, less people with less resources, less financially motivated people. There's different levels of, or there's different aims throughout the pyramid. So at the top, the nation states, you know, they're going for intelligence gathering, espionage, economic destabilization. Criminal groups, they're probably just going for financial gain. And the criminal groups won't have quite as good resources as the nation states, but they've probably still got some decent stuff. And down at the bottom, you've just got like the script kiddies, who they're just playing around. You know, they downloaded the low orbit ion cannon off the internet and they're just going to launch it at their dad's car because reasons. There's going to be a lot of people at that sort of level, we think. A lot of people who've just they're using free tools that are readily available online. Very simple to use. They don't need to know what they're doing. They just type in the IP address and press the button and it does the thing. And I mean, above them, there's also quite a lot of motivated individuals like hacktivists who are kind of ideologically motivated or just disgruntled. And they're probably going to be using slightly more advanced tools than the script kiddies, but they're going to be a bit more dangerous. And you know, as we move up the pyramid, we've got people who are more and more dangerous, but thankfully they tend to be fewer in number as we move higher up because it's harder to get to that level of skill or acquire that level of resources. But still, we think that all levels will probably have at least some interest in the CAV networks. There's also a lot of different types of assets within the CAV networks. There's the physical assets, which are things like, you know, your network hardware, transmission medium, the garages that people take for vehicle maintenance, back-end servers, test beds. There's a lot of different things that you could try and take down to wreak havoc in the network, or that you could target to try and steal information. We've also got digital assets. So things like sensor data, regional events data, traffic data, personal information potentially, test bed results. You know, it's they're not quite physically tangible, but they're certainly things that will be targeted by an attacker. I mean, intellectual property especially. Like if you can get a sneak preview at another company's development projects or development skills, like any new technology that's likely to come out, any breakthroughs, you know, it's a real big advantage for, say, a nation-state actor. Whereas, say, a hacktivist, they might just be targeting, I don't know, something more physical, like they might target a local garage because they're annoyed at the owner of the garage, or perhaps they just don't like all the cars. So here's an example scenario. I'm going to talk to you about Bob the Grumpy Guy. So Bob lives in a small village, which has a section of smart roadway running through it. He's upset by the speed at which cars travel through the village and wants them to slow down. He's read online that the RSUs placed every 500 meters along the roadside control the speed at which cars drive, so he decides he's going to target them. He's got a bit of a background in computers, and he spends some time online learning about hardware security. One night, he takes his laptop and a crowbar to an RSU which is hidden behind some trees. The RSU is in a locked cabinet, but Bob manages to lever it open with the crowbar. The physical tamper detection system of the RSU detects the unexpected opening of the door and sounds an alarm. An alert is sent to the CAV network requesting investigation. The loud alarm startles Bob, and he returns home. Based on his experience with the RSU, Bob decides to try and use other devices to get to the RSU. His neighbour happens to have a new intelligent vehicle, which connects to the RSUs. Bob does some research on his neighbour's new car and discovers the car broadcasts a hotspot which drivers can connect their phones to. Bob reads a web forum and finds an unofficial report saying that the technology used for this hotspot has an abusable authentication vulnerability. As Bob's within the hotspot's range, he can exploit the vulnerability to connect to the car from his bedroom. Using his prior knowledge of network security, he's able to pivot through the car's internal networks until he finds the surface which allows it to interface with the RSU. After some trial and error, he learns how to send status update messages to the nearby RSU. Bob uses these to send the RSU many reports that the road is covered in black ice. The RSU thinks that these reports have come from multiple vehicles, and it updates all of its internal models with the presence of black ice. Based on that, it decides that it's going to lower the speed limit for that area. The dynamically updated road signs along the vehicle alongside the village now display half the previous speed limit. Autonomous vehicles automatically adhere to them, and most of the manually driven cars do as well. Bob's happy again. His village is nice and quiet. There's none of these cars going through it at high speeds. Slightly different scenario. We're now dealing with a malicious nation state. So the fictional country of Zerone spends a lot of time comparing itself to its neighbor, the equally fictional Nerund. Nerund has a highly developed ITS roadway system with many internationally acclaimed CAV developers based in the country. Zerone decides it would like to have more developed CAV roadways too, but does not have the resources to fund the extensive development work that Nerund has done. Zerone decides corporate espionage would be a much more cost-effective measure for developing its technical capabilities. The Zeroni government engages APT-77, a Zerone-backed hacking group. This group is tasked with stealing as much information on CAV as possible from companies in Nerund. The APT-77 team decides that their first move should be to gain access to the internal networks of Nerund Auto, the country's leading vehicle manufacturers. A spearphishing campaign is launched, and APT-77 soon finds itself with footholds within various support functions of Nerund Auto. APT-77 discovers Nerund Auto does not make use of network segregation. The group can move from an HR employee's computer to one belonging to the tech support team. This tech support team has access to the research and development team networks. Once APT-77 gains access to Nerund Auto's R&D networks, they're able to steal a large amount of research work, including plans for unreleased vehicles. The Zeroni government is very happy with the information gathered by APT-77. They ask APT-77 to see if their foothold within the Nerund Auto network could be leveraged to gain access to a given car. The group quickly discovers that through the remote upgrade functionality implemented in all Nerund Auto products, they can push code to arbitrary vehicles. The Zerone government provides APT-77 with details of a Nerund Auto brand vehicle owned by a key Nerundi politician. The APT-77 group confirms they can push code to this vehicle. As the code comes from the trusted manufacturer, it's not evaluated for security, it's just installed directly into the vehicle. The APT group is able to cause the politician's car to take arbitrary actions. So what can we do about this? Thankfully, it's proposals. Doesn't exist yet. Or what does exist does not follow them as gospel. It means there's still plenty of time for us to address the issues within them. I mean, hopefully the outputs of this project will help to inform future decision-making processes. But this is just a team proposing, complaining about the proposals. We're not internal to any of the, ETSI or any of the bodies that have made these proposals. If anyone here is connected to them, we'd love to chat to you guys, or just generally, please do reach out to some security company. Of course, I'd love to say F-Secure, come straight to F-Secure, we'll sort everything out, but just in general, please talk to more security experts. Like, I lost count of the amount of times that I read security is out of scope for this document whilst I was reading these reports. Or alternatively, just take a look at the technologies yourselves. Internal security teams that can evaluate the proposed technologies. Stuff like 802.11p OCD mode seems to be quite under-researched. And if anyone does want to do a bit of research on it and has access to the tech, F-Secure is very keen to get hands-on with it. We're happy to collaborate on work. For testing at scale, these networks are going to be huge. They're going to basically be part of our critical national infrastructure. And they're going to get popped at some point for sure. But it's still important to remove the low-hanging fruit. Guys like Bob shouldn't be able to just go, I don't like that, I'm going to hack it now. I'm going to change the road speeds. But as we saw, it was detected that the RSC was opened up and the system was able to, it automatically started disregarding data coming from that node. It's important that we're able to detect breaches when they happen and address them in a timely manner. I think that also it's very important that people do more information sharing. So this be between vendors, between research groups. Cybersecurity should not be considered a competitive advantage. You shouldn't just be going, oh, well, we know how to fix that vuln, so we're better than them because they don't know how to fix it. I was talking about this with someone the other day, actually, a proposal whereby in future autonomous vehicles, it's like the trolley problem, you know, should the vehicle crash to avoid hitting a pedestrian? And the person I was talking to was of the opinion that in that scenario, the vehicle should always crash to save the pedestrian, because the person has accepted the risk by getting into the autonomous vehicle. And he was proposing that this would make it more of a selling point to have good security in vehicles, because you can be like, oh, well, you know, although sometimes our cars do crash into walls, they do it less than our competitors. You know, aren't we great? You should buy our brand. And I kind of disagree that that should be the way things work. I think we should work collaboratively. We shouldn't try and make it a competitive advantage. We should consider it as there's a real potential for harm with these basically kinetic weapons that we're driving around autonomously. We should be working together to secure them. So my conclusions from doing this project are that the current proposals are just not really fit for purpose. There needs to be more considerations for cybersecurity when people are designing these systems. You know, just stop passing the buck on cybersecurity or you'll make baby Jesus cry. I also think that 802.11 POCB mode is weird shit and that pseudonyms are even weirder shit. Just from reading these, I'm never getting connected in an autonomous vehicle. Like, at this point, I don't care how safe you tell me they are. I don't want to do it. I'd rather just drive it myself. And also, just in general, I want to hammer home the point that no node within these networks should rely on continuous connectivity. Each node should be able to behave independently, because it's almost a guarantee that it's going to lose connectivity at some point, even if it's not through malicious, malicious means. Just, you know, you've lost connectivity. Shit happens. Network's gone down. We need to be able to behave safely, even in that scenario. So before I stop talking, just a couple of acknowledgements. I want to thank my colleagues who contributed to this project. Joel, Rich, and Terry all worked heavily on this project. Also, my colleague Kaitan, who provided a lot of support, although he is no longer with us. He was very helpful just with little bits and pieces on this project. I'd also like to thank Surrey University for supporting our research work and lending us their expertise, Zenzik for funding this work, F-Secure for letting me work on it, and KFC for fueling my existence. Thanks for listening. If there's any questions, I will aim to answer them now.
Wonderful. Yeah, Vic, thank you so much for this presentation. What I love about what you guys did with this project at F-Secure was really look at it, with the lens of one, the government standpoint, who is really thinking more about connected roadways than they are thinking about connected vehicles. That was so helpful for me because every day in my day-to-day work, I'm thinking about how do you secure the in-vehicle network and its, points of connectivity and flash updates to the vehicle, and less about connected roadways. But at some point, those two things will come together. And secondly, just how the scale and magnitude at how big this ecosystem is going to be. Today, kind of like I'm presenting, so much of the conversation in automotive security is about how are you securing the vehicle itself. But as you're pointing out, in so many of these different weaknesses in the ecosystem, it's not just the vehicle, it's everything. It's how it all comes together. So really cool work. Really appreciated that. Your presentation. So a few questions from the audience, and I just posted to post your questions if you have them in the chat. Bill is asking something that I was kind of thinking about this whole throughout this presentation. It's so as security practitioners, one thing that we have to be careful about is usable security. In other words, saying that not halting innovation for the sake of security, but trying to find ways to make security fit in so that you can enable innovation. So Bill's question is, in your opinion, do you think the benefits of CAVs outweigh the risks?
Yeah, so before I answer that question, I've just got to give a quick shout out to our marketing team, Becky, Hannah, and especially Jenna, because I'm being yelled at for not acknowledging them. So, hello, Jenna, you are acknowledged. um, yeah, I think there's the potential benefit for CAVs to kind of revolutionize the way that we use the roads. I mean, there's the potential to greatly increase the efficiency of our road usage. Say you've got a bunch of lorries that are transporting a bunch of, I don't know, something to somewhere. Currently, you've got to have, like, say, 5 people driving those 5 lorries. In the future, you'll just have one person driving the front lorry, and the 4 tailing lorries will automatically just be following that one front lorry. The front lorry driver brakes, the other 4 will automatically brake. You'll also get more efficient fuel usage in this scenario because the lorries will be able to follow quite closely to each other theoretically because of the kind of split-second reactions of the automated systems. And I don't entirely understand the physics of it, but I believe due to slipstreaming, I think it's called, if you have a vehicle following very close behind another one, it can have a sizable impact on the fuel efficiency and also just the human overheads, really. And at the kind of consumer level, people won't have to pay quite so much attention while they're driving. You're endlessly seeing videos online of people like reading books while they're driving, or people eating cereal while they're driving. You know, in the future, you can eat your cereal all you want. The car will be doing it for you. I think it's going to be a real boon to security as well. Although I am quite wary of autonomous vehicles, at this point they are seeming like they are safer than humans. In part because humans are kind of bad at driving, really. We don't always pay attention. Sometimes the human's drunk or just gets distracted. I read a story of a report of someone who had an accident because they flipped down their little sun blocker flippy thing, I don't know what they're actually called, and there was a huge spider on it, and they went off the road because they were so startled by the spider. That's not going to happen to the autonomous vehicle. You know, the autonomous vehicle is never going to get startled or distracted. The autonomous vehicle is never drunk. The security of them there's a potential for them to be way higher. And I think that'll be the case even if they aren't quite as connected as we're proposing them be. If we do go for the route whereby all the vehicles can behave independently without the schooling behavior, without automatically being controlled by roadside units, without receiving constant alerts from each other, I think that even just the autonomous vehicle, sans the connectivity, has the potential to be safer than human drivers and more efficient than human drivers. And then when you add the level of cooperative behavior that's afforded by the high degrees of connectivity, that is just going to keep increasing. So I guess in answer to your question, yeah, I think the benefits outweigh the risks, but we need to consider carefully the kind of worst case scenarios of all of these, potential use cases.
Yeah, and so when I compare in my head this kind of thought of a developing network of vehicles and, using our time efficiently when we're driving and, being more efficient with vehicles, et cetera, these risks, these benefits today that we can comprehend. And then when I draw parallels from the origin of the internet, where, you kind of had the same thing throughout the 1980s and 1990s, where you had academic universities wanting to share research, kind of the first thoughts of how you could use the internet. But, and then it picked up steam and more steam, and businesses found ways to make money on the internet. And, now every consumer is on the internet. I mean, the way the internet as we know it today, and I'm saying internet, our devices using Google, the way that developed was, it just picked up steam so fast, and then security researchers had to kind of catch up over time, identify vulnerabilities. There was a lot of catching up to do. I guess just from me personally, my question to you is drawing parallels to how the internet developed and security research in that age. I mean, do you think that we're being proactive about these connected vehicles and vehicle networks? Do you think we're not being proactive enough? do you think this is something where innovation and just has to take hold and, oh, we'll patch the security as we go? Or is this going to be something where, no, we can do it right this time around and secure it before it's deployed?
I think at this point we are getting better about security. Quite often companies do have internal security teams, or they're approaching consultancies like F-Secure prior to releasing the product just to make sure that there's nothing wrong with it before it goes live. So I think that there are nowadays fewer issues than there were in the original internet days, where people would just release stuff and that was that. Security was an afterthought. It would just be some random person had spotted the security flaw, and then, I mean, infamously back then, vendors didn't take too kindly to people finding flaws within their systems. Quite often, researchers were threatened with legal action if they pointed out a vulnerability. Whereas I think with programs like bug bounties, a lot more companies are willing to engage a lot more on cybersecurity from the ground up. They're willing to actually pay the people who find vulnerabilities in their system. They're willing to patch these vulnerabilities. Generally, companies catch quite a bit of flack if they start complaining about researchers finding things now. I think it's kind of a societal shift almost. Cybersecurity affects everyone now because everyone's using computers so much. Like, Equifax, eBay, Yahoo, there's been so many big hacks with like hundreds of millions of people affected. Everyone knows about cybersecurity now. Everyone knows about, secure password usage. And I think that will become more of a driving factor in these future cars, even if it's not necessarily been driven from the vendor internally. I think that people will want to buy cars that are more secure. Like, you already get cars that are being, in the US at least, that are being marketed as death-proof because they've got excellent security mechanisms. They've got stuff that prevents them from rolling if they are in an accident like standard cars do. You've got airbags. Security is seen as a feature that people want in the cars. People will go for the more secure models. And I think that in the future, more people will be pressing for, well, I don't want a hackable car, I want the unhackable one. Or this company, their cars got hacked. Like, I mean, even Tesla, actually, they seem to catch flack quite often in the news once researchers manage to mess around with their systems. And I think that the consumer market is picking up on that. And as such, there is going to be more of a driving force behind having better cybersecurity in these future vehicles.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, carrying on with that parallel from the early days of the internet. Using a website to access research, maybe it was only 1,000 people around the world that were using it and not so much critical data was stored there. A lot of consumers started to think about security when they started paying for things online and their credit cards were at risk. And oh no, the hassle it creates when a company's breached and your credit card information was lost, or your social security number was compromised. I mean, I think it really did bring a lot of customer awareness when it comes to websites today. So I hope that's the case. I hope that cybersecurity is a business requirement for connected transportation. Sure does seem like it. I mean, the next big hack for a car where a passenger is hurt, it's hard to imagine the damage to the brand for that company. I think I think you're right that consumers would care a lot about that.
Yeah, I mean, in our report, we talk through a scenario where one company, just to try and take down one of their competitor companies, they enacted a campaign whereby they deliberately messed with the efficiency of the other vehicles just to cause the other reputational harm. So I think that there is kind of a potential for, almost like inter-vendor warfare.
Yeah.
I think I think that cybersecurity is going to be quite weaponized within this area, and it is going to cause the vendors to consider it quite carefully.
Yeah, and that's that's, I guess, on that particular subject, the subject of warfare between countries and cyber warfare. I mean, I think that's something that is an undertone to a lot of cybersecurity. Maybe one of the reasons why governments are really concerned about this as a means of national defense, because I mean, that really is concerning. What if, you know, a nation state level attacker was able to crash 1,000 cars at once? I mean, that would be a major, major attack on a country. So, you know, I try and stop myself from even thinking of those situations because it really does get terrifying. But I'm glad that you guys at F-Secure are putting that down on paper and helping people wrap their head around that, because it's certainly something that's a part of the equation here.
Yeah, some of our internal teams do keep an eye on the activities of various APT groups. So it is something that we, you know, look at internally, although it's not my area specifically. Certainly, if anyone wants more information on how to respond to APTs and just generally, you know, the risks associated with them existing at the nation level, please do reach out to me. I can pass your contact details on to colleagues who can provide more information.
Yeah. So one more question from the audience here. I'll frame it as a question. By the way, some people are asking for the link to your white papers. So if,
Yeah,
you
I
know.
was hoping someone would have posted it. I'm just, yeah, I think it's here.
So
Yeah, it's downloadable from that.
What's that?
It's downloadable from that page I've just linked in the chat.
Did you post it in the YouTube chat?
Yeah.
Okay, maybe I can't see it yet from this view. So the question that Bill is bringing up, as a little bit different of a question, is, so there's been talk about this 5-star cybersecurity rating for cars, where, I mean, we have it with safety ratings. People decide which car they want to buy based on the safety rating as given by a trusted third party. Does that make sense for cars? What do you think on that?
Yeah, I think it's a really good approach to have these kind of things be like independently verified, because it's all very well a vendor saying, "Oh, our cybersecurity is excellent; it's the best cybersecurity ever." But unless you've got some impartial third party looking at it, you know, are their claims really worth that much? So if there was some central body that did say, something we call for in the paper is industry standards on cybersecurity within the domain. So things like you need to have X cybersecurity tests done, you need to have a cybersecurity test done at the test bed as well as your standard tests. And with a kind of impartial third-party body being able to do that sort of thing, or perhaps just having like penetration testing consultancies be able to get approved to do that type of test, I think that'd be a much better system than just relying directly on the vendors, because it might be the case that although their internal test team, you know, knows a lot about vehicle security, they might kind of not notice things. They might kind of not see the forest for the trees. Whereas an impartial company, they might be like, oh, well, we've seen this sort of issue in this other vendor's vehicle, so we'll see if this vehicle's, you know, susceptible to that as well. And I just generally think that use of impartial third parties to authenticate the testing results would probably be the route to go.
Well, the challenge with a cybersecurity rating, like a safety rating, is that it kind of does drive business competition in that case. Suddenly, you know, you may see automakers like guarding their trade secrets around cybersecurity because it's their key to the, you know, 5-star safety rating. So those two things are at tension with one another. You know, how do we frame it in a way where it's, sure, you're having third-party audits, but also, you know, all cars have to be secure on the road. There is no 4-star cars allowed on the road. You know, how do we defeat that business competitiveness that is so prevalent in the automotive industry?
It's a really difficult question, and I think probably you need psychologists weighing in on that rather than cybersecurity people. But yeah, I think there is a hurdle that we need to get over, it being a competitive advantage versus a matter of life and death. We shouldn't really be saying, oh, well, we're better because that car kills more people. I don't think we should be considering things in those terms. But I don't have a psychology background. I can't really tell you how to make people start being more, showing a bit more humanity when they're making those sorts of decisions.
Yeah, or maybe it's some combination of both, ultimately. You know, like safety of passenger vehicles, when we're talking about functional safety, maybe that, and I'm not totally familiar with the regulatory landscape there, but maybe it's the case that 3-star vehicles aren't allowed on the road. So maybe the 3-star cybersecurity vehicles aren't allowed on the road, and that baseline establishes a minimum of cybersecurity, and then everything else is above and beyond. You know, the thought of a vehicle security operations center where you have analysts who are constantly watching the behaviors of your vehicle so that they could step in at a moment's notice if an attack did occur. Maybe that is, you know, I don't know, maybe that factors into that safety rating and allows that business competition to drive innovation. So, you know, I'm agreeing with you that maybe it is a psychology problem, and I don't think we all have the answers, certainly, but such an important part of this, because it's the business problems that will drive the spending in this space.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the body that does the authentication of the security measures before the vehicle can get its, like, you know, seal of approval to go out on the roads, I don't think they should just be like a wall or a hurdle that's got to be got past. I think they should also be supportive. They shouldn't just say, hey, your vehicle's shit, we can hack it. They should say, your vehicle's got problems in X, Y, and Z. Here's how you fix them. Because you've made these issues, we're assuming you're doing A, B, and C. Instead, you should probably do D, E, and F.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think a supportive environment to try and bring the security of the companies up in general, rather than just specifically saying, no, not good enough, come back later.
Yeah,
I think
and
perhaps rather than just you send off your vehicle, you get back a report.
Yeah, I agree. And Richard in the comments here is pointing out maybe an additional dimension to this, which is I'm sure that maybe it exists, the Automotive Safety Research Group. I don't think that exists in the same way that the security community exists here. You know, we're having this conversation. We have 5,000 members in the ASRG because, I mean, security is this really community-driven thing. So maybe it's some combination or these community groups, the ASRG, the Automotive ISAC, that are drawing vendors and automotive companies and us, the individuals, together to try and solve this problem. Maybe that helps defeat some of that business competition as well. Gets people collaborating more than competing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think we just need to create an environment where we're like fostering collaboration rather than like adversity.
Yeah. Well, wonderful, Vic. I really loved this presentation. I'm excited, you know, I'm excited for people to view this because I think it's such an important part of the equation here, the magnitude of it. You know, thinking 10 years off, what are these networks going to look like, and how are nation states, but also the hobbyists, you know, the script kiddies going to attack this. This is the type of foresight that maybe didn't exist in the early days of the internet. So really appreciate your presentation. Anything else you want to leave the audience with before we close out here?
Well, I was going to say it's kind of closer than you think. I think it's really good that the UK government's looking to look at the cybersecurity of these things so far in advance. But then just this week, it's been announced that there's hopes for like a more advanced lane assist to become kind of standard usage in cars in the UK by spring next year. So that the driver would be able to pretty much take their hands off the wheel, and the lane assist will be able to keep the vehicle automatically going within the same lane. So even though these are future proposals for tech that's in theory way off, stuff is coming sooner than you think sometimes.
Yeah, and it's
things
not
like
going to be one of the... Sorry, finish up.
If these things like these proposals aren't shaped up it could be that people start using them, even when they, it's probably a bit early to be using them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, oftentimes people point to Tesla for that very same reason. For better or for worse. The innovation, the technology will come, and to your point, it has been. It's here. It's already coming out. It's already the roadmap for the next 5 years of vehicles already set in stone. It's already underway. The prototype's already being developed. So we got to do our best to catch up, and then plan for the next 5 years after that.
Yeah.
So, well, really cool. Again, really present you or appreciate you presenting this information to us all here. Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'd love to have you again on here anytime you guys at F-Secure want to present research, we'd be more than happy to hold a webinar. So yeah, I guess with that said, we'll go ahead and close out here. Thank you everyone in the audience for joining. We make these webinars happen so that you guys have access to this information and content, and we look forward to you guys joining the next and upcoming webinars. We have lots of exciting stuff. I didn't show the agenda because we're still working on presentation names and trying to schedule stuff. But really, I mean, we have so many great presenters, so many exciting webinars on the horizon. So stay tuned, subscribe if you can, so that you can get these updates. And we look forward to seeing you at the next one. Thanks again, Vic.
Thank you.